I saw another advertisement. It's like, I want to be live. I mean, I want to be live. I just don't want to come. But anyway, there was an advertisement at the gym for an open mic, and I don't think we've ever done that on this campus. Yeah. I gotta sit down and talk with Ami. All right. You were on decay for Carl.
Yeah, I didn't.
This is what I have. You know what?
That's my home phone number, but it's off by one. That's my wrong phone.
So let's edit this.
813.
Okay, wait. Okay, 813.
385. 63.
6349.
49.
Now tell me if that's correct, because I can see a number and not recognize it. Okay, let's see if I have the text in here. Beverly really saved my ancestor, because I was just, I started coming short. And she's very good at just looking at me and make me calm down. Okay, let's see what I have to sign in. No idea what that is. All right. Which means this is why you didn't get some of the other texts I sent you. Well, that's cool. When she walked in with her hair, I went, wow! I said, you know, Beverly, it's 16 years old. And when I first met her, her hair was reddish brown. And she's been through various combinations, but I do love the multicolored hair. I do. I'm thinking of getting a washout kind and just and then get rid of my wisdom glitter. My son says, Mom, what are you doing here? When he was a little kid, I had a dress that came up to here.
Yeah.
Just right here. And most of my dresses were black, just because I hated gold lace. He says, Mom, what dress? Somebody had to. Anyway, this next year.
Yeah, I saw they did that.
So how's your son feeling?
He's doing nice.
Oh, nice. Oh, like actual research. Oh, I And are you ready for your next question? 8:30, 8:30. We're doing them all at 8:30. Tuesday, Thursday. This one's Friday, yeah, but we're just doing them all at 8:30. There's a Tuesday day, and a Thursday day. Well, I have to be at class. Yeah.
So glad about
It's streaming right now? Okay. Oh, we could have Gary sit somewhere else.
I wonder if I can.
Who's there?
Yeah. Well, the feedback I got was it was incredible. He spoke almost an hour.
wore me out.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was. Absolutely. It's not funny how he did this.
Yeah.
And how we set up the function for the longest time.
Yeah.
To enter into the students' time.
Yeah.
And the fact that we were struggling to get back to that 1 o'clock plan.
Yeah.
So by the time we finished questions and answers, it was a quarter to 1. So we started studying nothing. We started about 11.
Yeah.
But then you just get into well, I'm not doing
And what did you went to? You went to the teams thing.
So with that,
Yeah.
he comes here.
He does.
Yeah.
So we're good.
Okay, all right, yeah, we'll get it. We'll get somebody down there. No worries.
Well, so that's one option.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really cool. It felt great. I didn't know, I'm like, okay, this is. Oh, wow. I never, oh, wow, I never counted mine, but I never. Go home.
What?
Because I feel like there's something bugging me. I almost moved it all, like I looked out and I don't know, I think or no.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Doing good?
Yeah, doing good. How are you doing these days?
I'm
That's like a quarter.
fantastic. I mean, it really is. I have no complaints whatsoever. And the weather's been tremendous too these last couple of days, so.
Not to mention you have the view of downtown.
I know. On those clear days, right out there.
Yeah, we got everything open. Wanted to see that.
Yeah.
And you can, on a clear day, you guys can see.
Easy, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you can see the Dolphins Fury in their city.
You know, I haven't looked, because that one would be, I haven't seen it. You can see the USA, you know, the USAA building that's off of 75. You see their corporate offices pretty clearly, and you can see downtown. But I haven't looked at that. That one, I don't know if that rises above the tree line, just because of like the angle, you know, that you would have. It would actually be taller to see that. But I'll have to look next time.
But I don't know if you see that.
Yeah, no, I'll have to check. Which one?
Like the T-Mobile, you know, is it like a data center? Is it just a call
Well,
center?
I think I don't know if it's their part, yeah, it's some kind of processing back up.
I used to work at GTES
Did you?
in Telephone Park.
Uh-huh.
That was part of IT.
Yeah.
Of course, now it's gone.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'll look for the Falcons Fury next time.
Yeah.
I will. I'll see what I can find there.
We all back to the room.
I just left mine at home, I was sleeping. Even though I still have my kids to my floor, I didn't know how I would have them, but. But it's, which I'm not sure who's having one.
I don't trust myself.
Thank you.
I'm Anne Paulson. I like
I don't have it. It's like everything.
Oh, yeah. You'll notice. Oh, I love you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We got 9:30. We can go ahead and get going. Dr. Beard joined us. I don't think you're going to stick around, but he's going to say.
I'll say a few words.
Say a few things. He's part of our team, obviously, but probably not going to be sitting in on most of the negotiations, but we'll sit in from time to time, I think.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I certainly want to say good morning and happy Friday. Certainly, if the day is, if the weather is any indication of what kind of day we're gonna have, or meet we're gonna have, we're in good shape. But I just want to say a few words to y'all before we get rolling here. I certainly want to apologize for not being at meeting number one. I think you prefer that I would be in Tallahassee fighting the battle there, because I can tell you this time of year during the committee meetings, session starts in March and goes for 60 days. But most of your work is happening these next few weeks in our committees. And while we talk and while we're here, legislation is being proposed all the time through policy that will affect our finance. And I can tell you off the bat, there are some bills that are very significant and have grave budget implications for state colleges. One in particular, HB 189, will affect upfront $100,000 if we're able, if that bill passes, in terms of having materials, instructions for the private and charter schools. So we are dealing with that, and we've been promised if that bill passes that we will be, I guess, in a sense, we will get the funding we need to cover that cost. But that's just one example. And I can tell you, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu. Meaning that they're going to do what they want to do to us. So they want to see us. It's okay to be on video conference or on the phone, but they really want to see representation from the colleges. So we have to go up there and fight that fight. Even though we have a lobbyist, they want to see us. So it's not that I didn't want to be in the first meeting, but I think if you're talking about $100,000 year one, particularly $1 million in 5 years of the cost us, we need to be up there showing up at the table, not on the menu. And we had a chance to go to DC for a few days. We are able to get some good leverage regarding year-round Pell and continuation, as well as second chance Pell, which will allow funding for individuals who are incarcerated to kind of get a new start. So these are fights this time of year that we have to be out fighting, because I know how important resources are for this institution. And let me just say, as we go into these negotiations, we really believe that we have a great team here, a great family. We will remain a team and a family even after the first contract has been sketched out. One thing about a family, you don't get everything you want. And sometimes you feel like your husband or wife, they're not listening to you. Maybe it doesn't happen in your family, but it happens in mine. But we've had 46 and a half years of great progress. And the question arises, can we be better? Yes, we can. We can be better. And being part of institutions, I don't fault anybody for wanting better terms with regards to employment and conditions of employment. And certainly it begs the question, can we do it better? And we always can improve on both ends as administration, faculty, and staff. So I see this in a positive way, in the sense it allows us to assess and evaluate what we're doing. Can we do it better? Can we enroll more students more efficiently? Can we retain students? Can we help students complete them? And then you ask the question, well, is there a cost? Can we afford it? And can we sustain our ability to pay for it? These are the kind of questions certainly I hope you would entertain as you go through the different proposals. But I certainly always welcome, to a large degree, assessment and evaluation. I think we have a good institution that can be greater, and we all depend on all of you to help us do that. So we want you to just think about as you go through this. This is very, very serious. I don't have to say that. I told the administrative team a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks, we have 5 or 6 major initiatives that are going on at the college that will change the landscape of the way we do business the next 50 years. And this is one of those initiatives in terms of coming up with a contractual agreement with our team of faculty and unit. And of course, we want to make sure that it's a well thought out process. Ask every question, particularly as it relates to, can we do it? Is it affordable? Can we sustain this? And hopefully it'll also be an education, as many of you all learn about how monies are received and how they're spent in the institution. We believe it's very important, even though we have our budget workshops after the board approves the budget. Sometimes you're not able to get in on those workshops. So hopefully you, at some point, you get a chance to kind of understand that process a little bit better. So again, I just want to say we welcome these talks. We welcome the ability to be able to sit down with our faculty leaders and ask the question, can we do X, Y, Z? Can we afford it? Can we sustain it? So again, I'll be popping in from time to time. We know we'll keep the board abreast of what's going on. Of course, we'll also record the activities as well. We want to be as transparent as possible. But just keep in mind that we all have the same common goal, and that is to do what's best for our students, our college, which means our employees, faculty, administrators, staff, and of course, we're here to serve our community as well. So I tend to be a very positive individual. I believe we always want to ask, when we get the yes, can we get the yes? And if we can't, why not? If we get the yes, again, lastly, can we afford it? Can we sustain it? And again, thanks for all you do here at this institution, and we look forward to hearing a good report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Day two.
Actually, you're supposed to celebrate the whole month.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's why I'm
Lucky man.
That's why I'm
All right, I think everybody, we handed out, Ms. Fay did draft meetings from the last meeting on last Friday, February. I've reviewed them and I think they're accurate and fine. This is sort of along the lines of what I envisioned the minutes being, but if you guys want to take a minute, if you haven't already looked at it, and I don't know if we want to approve them formally or if you have thoughts as to going forward, how you want the minutes. For me, the most important thing I think, as we talked about last time, was that we have in the minutes what was presented, the proposals, what topics were discussed, not so much each side's position or the whys and reasons. That'll become unwieldy, I think. But looking back, if we're still at this 6 months from now, a year from now, being able to show when we introduced topics and that kind of thing, and when we agreed on things, that obviously will be here too. So that this handles that. Any thoughts on from your guys' perspective on whether these are acceptable? You want something different going forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is pretty, I think covers what needs to be covered and not much more, which is perfect, I think, from our perspective. I didn't see anything that we needed correcting. Yeah, so I think this is fine.
we'll have this space circulate after each meeting, and she, those of you that know Pam Nadolski also works here, will also do, I think that's the plan, we'll rotate with Ms. Fay on occasion.
Yeah, I'm on the first floor and then she's.
Right, so we'll get minutes from either Mickey or Pam and forward them after each meeting so you can review them, and then the following meeting we can discuss whether any changes need to be made before finalizing. I think we have mostly the same group here, but I'm not sure, I don't know, trying to remember everybody's names. We want to go around and kind of introduce one again. I think that'd be helpful for the first at least few sessions. Might be helpful for Mickey too. I'll start. I'm Brian Coach. I'm with Alan Norton and Blue here on behalf of the management team.
Good morning, Stan Giannett, Vice President of Academic Affairs and Faculty Development of the College Provost at DHSC.
Good morning, I'm Elisa Hartz. I'm the Vice President of Technology and Distance Education.
Imani Asikili, Director of Global Multicultural Awareness and Special Assistant to the President.
Tony Rivas, I'm Associate Vice President of Facilities Management and Administrative Services.
Lisa Richardson, Associate Vice President of Alumni and College Relations and Executive Director of the Foundation.
Julie Hendrickson, Associate Professor of Biology at West Campus.
Eric Scaziani, Professor of Biological Sciences here in West Campus.
Lauren Byers, Southern Organizing Specialist for the United Faculty of Florida.
Grant Picklesheimer, United Faculty of Florida, and Union Chief Negotiator.
Caitlin Downing, I teach English on West Campus.
Gary Ash, teach psychology on East Campus.
Frederick Prescott, Mathematics here at Newport Richie.
Okay.
Brian Horn, Vice President of Finance and Executive Services.
Darrell Clark, Executive Director of Human Resources.
All right, before we get down to business, I just echo what Dr. Beard said. I know we're not always going to agree on everything, but one thing we probably can agree on is the more resources we can get from Tallahassee. It's in everybody's best interest, which is always the challenge. So I know the United Faculty is always doing things to lean on the legislature, and college associations doing the same. So anything where we can team up
That's right.
on that thing, I think we can all agree. So if there's things and initiatives that you guys have along those lines, we're always willing to help. Last session, we agreed to try and focus on, I think, 3 areas today: the recognition clause, grievance and arbitration provision, and the leave of absence article. What I did, and I'll start, and I'm happy to do it any way you guys want to do it. And we do have, before we get it, let me let you know that we have some breakout facilities if we need to caucus. And right here in this building, right?
Yes.
J140 is room for you guys, and we're going to J120. So if we need to do a caucus at any point, let us know, and you guys can make use of that facility open for you. What I did on the 3 articles, and we can do them one by one if you want, I went through and did a track changes version. Thank you for sending me the Word version of your proposal, and I think you received the same from me. I went through with each of the 3 and tried to look for some common ground, quite frankly, on these and combine as much as I could. So I'll hand out the recognition clause first. And, and kind of walk through what we're proposing as a compromise. And you guys can respond or tell us what you guys think, and then do it topic by topic. All right, so what you're looking at here is I took the recognition language from our initial proposal, management proposal, and then everything in the track changes format is what's different from the last time. Fast forwarding ahead, you'll see I did sanded grievance arbitration provisions, started with our proposal, and then took some of yours. On the leaves of absence, I took your proposal since it was more comprehensive, and then put our suggested changes in it. But looking at the recognition clause, I think what I did really was try and take some of the language from yours and some of the language from ours. And as we talked a little bit about last meeting, I think we all agree on the basic purpose of the recognition clause. The college clearly recognizes the United Faculty as the exclusive representative of the full-time faculty here. Added the language in the first paragraph basically from your clause. And also that first sentence in the second paragraph, I think, is lifted out of yours, that we will not only recognize you, but we agree not to negotiate or recognize any other agencies to represent full-time faculty. I think that's not a controversial position. I did leave in, and what's different from yours is the last, I broke it out into the last paragraph. And we are proposing that the recognition clause not form the basis for any grievance or arbitration for the reasons I stated last time, but if you want, repeat those.
Okay, we brought a proposal as well, which are, I think the places where we look for common ground were kind of similar. So I'll distribute that. We kind of identified three, I don't even know if I really want to call them substantive differences, but at least significant enough to rise above being merely editorial. Two of those we were fine with, but the third, and probably not surprised which, we were a little more hesitant on. So if everyone has a copy, I'll proceed. So as you can see, we included your language regarding explicit reference to the PERC certification and the date it was certified. That was not problematic for us at all. We added in your proposed language on union refraining from direct dealing, essentially. Didn't think that was controversial, just as you didn't think ours was controversial. However, we did not include the sentence regarding exclusion of the recognition clause from the grievance process. And so for both general and specific reasons, but just, sort of generally, as you know, under 447-401, the parties are required to have a collective bargaining agreement that ends in final and binding, as a grievance procedure that ends in final and binding arbitration for all provisions of the contract. Now, the parties can agree to waive that. They can agree to exclude articles from the contract. I'm not saying that the proposal is illegal, but it is a waiver of that right to have all portions of the contract subject to the grievance procedure. And just very generally, at this point, we're not really interested in entertaining waivers like that. If we get down to the wire and there's a significant concession that administration wants to make in order to earn a waiver like that, I think we'll be happy to have that discussion. But I think out of the gate, our position on waiver language in general is that we're not particularly interested in entertaining that. Specifically, with regards to the recognition clause, you mentioned it being sort of used as a catch-all for every grievance in the world. I'm familiar with that practice, don't endorse it, because I don't know very many arbitrators that sustain grievances, nothing more than cite the recognition clause. Found that to be a waste of money and resources for both sides. I don't know, you mentioned you hadn't bargained with college or university setting before, so you may not be familiar with how United Faculty of Florida's grievance and arbitration internal process works, but there is actually a contract enforcement committee, a centralized statewide contract enforcement committee that makes the decision on not necessarily whether to go to arbitration, that's obviously up to each local bargaining unit, but the decision to provide any resources, staff resources, or funding to pay for that arbitration is made at the level of the contract enforcement committee. It's a very, very experienced group of people that do this. They don't tend to, they're pretty conservative. They don't tend to take anything to arbitration just because they can. So the situation that you described of, oh, we don't like something that happened, let's file a grievance and cite the recognition clause. Very unlikely that United Faculty of Florida is actually going to provide resources for that to go to arbitration. So maybe that makes you feel a little better, maybe it doesn't, but either way, at this time, we're not really interested in language that excludes portions of the contract from the grievance procedure.
Let me maybe ask a couple of questions and address a couple of those things. And you're right, I think in the end, a lot of these things, even if we don't get agreement today, might be the kind of things you package together. And I have yet to go to impasse a deal breaker over a recognition clause. I'm hoping that's not the first, obviously, but usually end up obviously compromise. I understand what you're saying. Just this is probably mundane discussion for most people, but a couple of concerns I have that first I would readily admit, and while I don't typically do a lot of negotiations with the United Faculty, I have been involved with administering the contracts. My firm obviously does a lot of negotiations with you guys, and I would admit that the United Faculty is more professional than a lot of the other labor organizations we deal with, both in negotiations and in what you choose to take to arbitration and not. I think that's a credit really to the faculty more than and the union, but generally very professional. So that's not a big concern. And while I don't have a lot of experience with Pasco Hernando faculty yet, I'm sure it's going to be the same. A couple things though. One, it is possible for non-members to take things to arbitration too, and while they may have to put their own money out there to do it, that's an issue. The other thing that I usually bring up in this discussion is I always ask, well, what's the purpose? If somebody can give me examples of the kinds of grievances that might trigger an arbitration under the recognition clause that doesn't fall within the category of unfair labor practices, then I could see the other side. But no one yet has been able to explain where we would violate this that wouldn't be an unfair labor practice such that in other words, I can't even conceive of a grievance that could come out of this that wouldn't be the kind of catch-all grievance. And if that's the case, why not agree to it? That's sort of the flip side. I understand what you're saying. We're never really going to go to arbitration over this. Arbitrators, you're right. I don't think a lot of them like that theory and don't buy it. The problem is once we get to the point where we're getting an arbitration decision along those lines, we both spent that in excess of $25,000 and got a lot of hostility. To me, if you have a violation of the recognition clause, clearly the college has to comply with this, whether it's in the contract or not. It's an unfair labor practice for us, but the unfair labor practice procedure is usually faster and cheaper in my experience with these kinds of things, and oftentimes gets resolved before it ever gets to a hearing, quite frankly, whereas arbitration, it never happens that way. So that's really all I'd say about that. You don't necessarily have to respond to that, but you can if you want. Whether or not it's something where we can have common ground or as part of the package, I think that's something that you probably should consider on our side and yours as well.
Yeah, so just to the first point you mentioned about people who aren't union members or who the union doesn't represent going and doing that on your own, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at our agreement procedure, which is maybe what we're turning to next, in our proposal under 4C, our proposal specifically forbids, well, I don't want to say forbid, I guess allow. Anyway, substance of it is, this is on page 13, that that an individual faculty member won't have a right to access arbitration over the objection of the union. There's plenty of case law on this. Essentially, that if the employer entertains grievances, settles grievances over the objection of the union, even when the union elects not to represent faculty members of that, essentially undermines the union's role as the exclusive bargaining agent, because now the faculty is, excuse me, now the administration is negotiating individual settlements for grievances with individual faculty that the union would not have and does not want being agreed to under the terms of its contract. So if that provision of our grievance procedure makes it into the final contract, you won't have to worry about anyone other than United Faculty of Florida processing something to arbitration. Certainly not over just the recognition clause.
Right, but on that point, you guys, the United Faculty would have to block a non-member by saying, we're not gonna allow you because we don't want this issue and we don't agree with the merits. Under the law, if United Faculty says we're not going to pursue arbitration because you're a non-member, we don't want to spend our resources, then they have the right to go to arbitration, which, as far as I recall, you guys can't do anything about. But so you could say, well, we're going to block you because we're refusing to arbitrate because we don't think this issue should be arbitrated or we don't like the merits. But that's one of those situations where my experience is usually with non-members, most of the time unions don't want to do that because it kind of puts you in the crosshairs of maybe getting an unfair labor practice against the union for non-members. With members, obviously, it's easy. You can do whatever you want to do. But so that I get what you're saying. It's only likely to come up in a small subset of cases. So it probably isn't, as I said, a deal breaker, but it happens enough in my experience that given that no one's really been able to come back and explain why it should be, why you should be able to file a grievance in the recognition clause, which doesn't otherwise constitute unfair labor practice, it's enough to say we should keep it in. But I think we understand each other's points. I would also point out, it looks like from looking at your markup of your initial proposal that you sent around, that I think on the other points we're pretty much in agreement. I mean, I don't think we're led to your language versus our language. It looks like we're gotten close on the fact that you agree not to go directly to board. We agree not to recognize others. You know, I do like to have a reference to the PERC certification in there. I think just because sometimes you get 20 years later and no one seems to remember exactly who's in the bargain. That should never happen, but it does happen. This makes it a little easier. But it looks like on all those things we're on the same page. So unless you disagree, I think really the only issue is that last sentence of ours.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's about the size of it. I guess one other thing I'll just point out is some, I guess, slight differences in terminology usage that you probably noticed, but I just kind of wanted to explain why the difference. So in our proposal, we're suggesting that it's the board of trustees that's referred to as the board of the employer rather than the college. And the reason for that is there are a number of places in the contract where we talk about the college as in the sense of like the facilities or like the broader college community, separate from the management that operates the college. So just to kind of prevent confusion, that's why that difference is there. And there, as you read through our initial proposal, I think you'll notice that there are a few places where that kind of helps prevent a little bit of confusion between the management of the college and like the facilities of the college, the students at the college, and things like that. I don't think I think it's more a style thing than a substance thing, but I just wanted to point that out and explain it in case.
Yeah, I don't think that makes sense to me. I think maybe using employer is pretty common. To be clear, that's at the end of the day, when we have an agreement, I think we can all agree we want it to be as clear as possible. So anybody reading it, whether it's faculty members, students, public, administration, hopefully we all can see what it means. So that's the kind of thing I think as we're going through these first few that hopefully we can start to use the same terminology, but I think we'd be on board with using employer place at college. I don't know if you prefer union or UFF. I think we started using union. I've been accused of being a little anal, I guess, on some of those things too. So one of the things I do want to do as we're going through is try and be consistent. And I did have it on my list of things to mention today, is to maybe try and figure out whether just formatting, things of that nature, so that we both can go forward and start using similar language. You know, you have the Article 1 Roman numeral, I have Article 1 with the number. I hate Roman numeral, that's another thing, but those are not deal breakers. I just start to see XVBII, and I just have to go back and remember all this stuff. But
That's why we try and have larger catch-all articles.
yeah. So as we're going forward, if we can try and settle on some of those things, and I'll try and adopt your styles and things, so it's clear, and for those of you who haven't looked at a lot of union contracts, you'd be shocked at how many of those kinds of things are confusing and inconsistent and errors throughout. And once you get 2 or 3 contracts in, sometimes it starts to affect the meaning. And when you start to look at, well, why is it written this way? And no one knows, because we're all gone. 10 years from now, someone else sitting at the table. So in a first contract, if we can try and avoid those things, it'll be beneficial for everybody when you come 20, 30 years from now. So, but in any event, it's not the biggest issue. So what I suggest, why don't we move on to the grievance and arbitration, and then talk about that, and maybe we'll caucus after we go through all 3 articles and talk about some of these things, see if we've got some grounds to tentatively agree to anything today, or if we push it off into discussions of other articles. And I did the same thing, so I'll pass out mine on. If you have one, you can pass out at the same time. We did the red line version of the grievance and arbitration provision again. This one's starting with our initially proposed language and trying to find common ground with your proposal.
Yeah, we didn't bring one on Article 5 just because I think ours sort of deviated a little more from the standard grievance procedures in the 70s, and it sounded like you were kind of interested and engaged on the tax out, so we kind of left that to you. But we'll definitely give you some thoughts on what we see here.
Okay, if you have in front of you our proposal, what we've done again is take our proposal from last time, and I've tried to add to it some of the things I mentioned at the first meeting, where we thought the union's proposal had some good ideas. Section 1 is really just the overview, and I took that from your section 1, the purpose of the grievance being made, and I think I almost word for word, not word for word, just added to that. I did leave our first sentence, I think, added to that, but the gist of it is the same. If you have a good contract and good relationship, hopefully you never have to resort to grievance and arbitration provision. But if you do, the hope is that you can settle any disputes quickly at the lowest possible step. I think we're all in agreement to that. But occasionally it comes up where you may have to take it further. Looking at the actual meat of the procedure, which is in section 5 of ours, I added the informal step that you had in yours. And where it has the strike-through language it's your language is showing that I didn't take it wholesale. And that's, you can see here, it's just more for housekeeping and trying to keep the language consistent with ours. You'll see another one of my little pet peeves, and that lawyers like to spell out the number and then put the number in parentheses. I've never been able to figure out why we do that, but I prefer to do one or the other. I don't really care which it is, but I actually saw at one point in a settlement agreement, 6-figure range, someone had, we do the same thing, and had it spelled out the amount you're getting paid, and we put in parentheses the number, and it was different. You know, it's just a typo somewhere, but parties figured it out pretty quickly. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that, like, yeah. So I don't know. It's lawyers, we tend to do things, and labor representatives, because we all tend to do things like that just because we've always done it. So I don't really care. It's the bottom line. But if we're doing a first contract, I would do it, just spell it out once, unless there's a reason to do it differently. So just an aside.
And the only advantage I've ever gotten out of that is when you're trying to quickly scan through something, having that like number of parentheses is kind of easy to see, but in the modern era where things are electronic, right, we have computers to find things for us, so I don't really care either.
Yeah, and that's I tend to like the actual number itself rather than spelling out for that reason, because I think those jump off the page a little bit for you. But again, those are minor things. The kinds of things as we go forward, though, and you're doing proposals and I'm doing them, whatever we settle on, I'll just adopt what you guys are doing, so it's consistent. Dr. Gina pointed out to me that section 1, the level 1, the first formal step, it spelled out the immediate supervisor, academic dean is who you bring the grievance to, and there's a few places in here, I think we just say dean. We'll probably want to insert academic dean since there are additional deans in the college. But basically the process is the same. After the informal meeting, you've got step 1, academic dean. Since you're already going to have met with them, I think it makes sense from your proposal not to require you to go through that hoop again, but academic dean, if he moves it to the formal level, you just issue the formal written response. I don't recall if your days in terms of the submissions, here I have 10 days, was the same as ours, but that's an issue that generally, whether you want 7, 10, 14 days, if it's some reason I don't think is a problem. So I left ours in there just with 10 because that's what we had. But if yours was different, I think that's probably not a problem for us. I did have a definition of days being Monday through Friday on days the college is open. So 10 days is essentially 2 weeks. If yours had calendar days, you wanted 14, again, to me, I don't think it's an issue. As long as it's clear and everybody knows what the timelines are, that's what's important. Level 2, again, I changed the terminology to match yours from step level.
Stop you for just a second, clarity question. So you've included our language on the informal step, which refers to the employee's immediate supervisor. Is that going to be one and the same as the academic dean that does it through level 1?
In the nursing department, the immediate supervisor of the faculty is the associate dean of nursing. So that's why we left the immediate supervisor, because in some areas, particularly nursing, it's the associate dean of nursing who reports to the dean of nursing and health programs.
So then for nursing, who would step 1 be with?
Yeah, we may have to address that separately, whether we want to have, right now it's the academic dean, but we either can put in something along the lines of for the nursing associate dean, or if you want the informal to go to the dean, which I imagine you would, you'd still want the
Local. We could just start local at the associate dean, immediate supervisor level, then escalate to the academic dean of nursing and health programs, ideally, which is our current standard practice.
Right, yeah, I think when we were drafting, the assumption here was that level 1 would be the same person as the informal, so just, just something to think about. I just wanted to see.
Yeah, that's a good point. We might decide whether we need to address that, or for nursing, you can have the informal go to the associate, but the formal go to the academic. Different ways to do that, but let us talk about that.
Ours, I think, also is 10 days throughout, and our definition of days in Article 2, letter M, says a day during which the college operates and conducts business as designated on its calendar. Probably the same idea, at least, if not the exact same meaning, but
yeah, I think I limited it to Monday through Friday, and frankly, I'm not sure because I wasn't sure it just conducts business. If you guys do anything on Saturday or have a Saturday night class or Sunday or things of that nature, but just so it wasn't unclear, but we can talk about that. I don't know if that's the case here. Added your language under bottom of level 3, I thought was good, that if it involves multiple supervisors, bargaining employees, that they can just bypass that first level, go right to the second level. I think that makes sense when the first level doesn't really have the ability to resolve the grievance. We don't want anybody to have to jump through hoops just to jump through hoops. On page 3, as I mentioned at the first session, I do like the idea that you guys had about the arbitrability issue being raised quickly and informally first to try and get that resolved. So I basically adopted that wholesale and added that here. That's something I wish more contracts had, frankly, because we also get bogged down and it really shouldn't. But other than that, we've kept ours the same. I did, as you've seen here, and I think I referenced it last time, in terms of selecting the arbitrator left in the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service as the source of the arbitrators, in particular because I'm not a big fan of AAA, American Arbitration Association. Found it extremely expensive and not very flexible. There's also jams, I think, but I don't know if they do stuff up here much. The main concern I have with FMCS is to make sure we get to arbitration, that we get a panel that includes arbitrators from Florida, or at least have a business address in Florida. A lot of them have multiple, but I've been receiving a lot in other contexts where they're having arbitrators come down from Tennessee, North Carolina, and whatnot. They'll usually give you the Southeast region. Problem is, if they're not from Florida, then we pay, both parties pay, to fly them down here, stay in a hotel, and it becomes expensive, and I think there's plenty in Florida, so I usually have been adding to my contracts now that if you make a request, you have to ask for, I think they call it the metropolitan and central Florida area, and then they'll give you that. So that's never been controversial, but I'd like that to be in the contract, just so that whoever's making the request from FMCS knows to check that box on the form that has to be from this metropolitan area, so we don't end up spending an extra $5,000 each to fly someone down for a vacation around the Gulf. I'm sure the arbitrators love it.
I guess this is a good time as any to ask a couple of questions, unless there's something else you wanted to speak to.
No, interrupt me at any point, kick me in.
Okay, so again, and I guess it's probably going to be another mundane discussion for most people who are here. But in your proposal, you suggest that the party requesting arbitration shall strike first. Our proposal is that the moving party shall strike first. So traditionally, particularly where a contract is silent, it's generally accepted that in a contract interpretation case, which is most things, the burden of proof is on the union. The union party is alleging that the contract has been violated. The union has the burden of proof to establish that violation. Discipline, on the other hand, the administration is alleging that an employee committed some form of misconduct. The employer bears the burden to show that misconduct happened. So the employer is considered the moving party in those cases. And that has not really as significant of implications as it would in the court, but it has some implications in arbitration. But a specific implication in your proposal here is that the party requesting arbitration shall strike first. So I think I'm reading that to mean that, it's only ever the union who's going to request arbitration, right? Or is that the intent? So is the idea here that basically the union will strike first?
That's the intent of the language, yeah.
Okay.
And that, my view of it is if the union wants to go to arbitration, you strike first again is a big ticket item in my mind, not really. Some contracts have the coin flip and that kind of thing, which you can do, but we usually are on the phone, so it's difficult to do. And I've never had a fight over that, but I did see that is a definite difference in what we're proposing.
Okay, just to make sure I understood.
One of the things, and this may be something we'll have to circle back around, is we haven't negotiated discipline. We haven't proposed to put discipline into the contract. So, and I did see that you had his definition of movement being different for disciplinary agreements versus contract interpretation. I don't disagree with anything that you've stated in terms of what the typical burden of proof is, contract interpretation case versus a discipline case. But that is something we're proposing, whoever moves for arbitration, including whoever's requesting it, strike first. Employer, occasionally, I've had one where we request arbitration, but it's usually the union, obviously.
Right. Okay, I just want to make sure I understood.
That's all I had on the grievance and arbitration provision.
I guess one other sort of substantive comment. So in your proposal, it says the arbitrator is authorized only to decide the specific grievance submitted at level 1 of the grievance process. So I guess I take that to mean that there's no amending of grievances after that is put to paper at level 1. Is that the idea?
Not entirely, and maybe the language, we could flesh that out, but the concern of management on that is the ambush at arbitration. And I think it's a concern for unions as well. We don't want to get to arbitration. Arbitration, you'll have, unlike case law cases, you don't have a lot of discovery and things of that nature. By design, keep it cheap and keep it moving quickly. But you also don't want to show up in arbitration and hear all new claims and arguments and evidence on either side. That's really what that's designed to do. If there are things that come up, because sometimes you do have steps come up where new evidence or new allegations or new defenses come up. I think we want to be able to do that so long as it's brought up in earlier steps. Maybe we should have level 3 or go back. I know in a couple of contracts we have, we'll go back and say, well, if you want to amend it, and you got to go back through the process again and give the college then the opportunity to respond to that, because it might even forestall or do away with the need for arbitration, right? So the intent is that neither side ambush the other side with something new that hasn't been brought up in the first. That's the reason for the first 3 steps, to make sure you can have a frank discussion, see if you can get common ground, avoid the arbitration, resolve the dispute. And a lot of it might be lawyers, and the business agents, at the earlier steps, the hope is you don't need to have a lot of lawyers and representatives. You have a union steward, maybe management talking amongst themselves, resolve it all. And I think what happens a lot of times is then you get to arbitration, everybody lawyers come in, look at everything, oh, we want to raise this, new arguments, new claims, new evidence, and we screw it up. I apologize for all my colleagues that do that, but to me, it's not productive. And if you're going to arbitrate, it should be a bona fide dispute where the parties have tried to resolve it, put the cards on the table, and we can't resolve it. Third party comes in and resolves it for us. So no real ambush. So that language is very direct, but probably could be fleshed out to better convey that. I don't think there's any intent to say, well, once you've done level 1, you're stuck. You can't ever go back, and despite you found some other evidence, we found a different angle to this, as long as it's not at the arbitration that you're doing it.
Right, yeah, and I obviously understand the concern. That's why we had a proposal to resolve arbitrability ahead of time, right? Because being ambushed.
That's one of those issues that gets ambushed, yes.
So, I guess, in the spirit of fairness, it seems reasonable to have kind of the same sort of timeline for all that stuff. Like, you got to raise arbitrability within 10 days. If you want to amend the grievance or make new allegations, you got to do that within 10 days, or just something to kind of have a similar timeline for those types of things that are really all getting at the same concern, right? About being ambushed with new stuff.
I think we'd be on board with something along those lines. I've had also, and I'm sure you've seen it somewhere, they even make it more formal where X days before the arbitration, you have to have a witness list, exhibit list. I'm not totally in favor of that, because I think it starts to look like a lawsuit, which is fine, but that makes it expensive, time consuming. And to me, if we can do it the way you're suggesting, that's probably the way to do it, is maybe have a timeline of when you're going to introduce things, or if you're going to amend things, do it before the arbitration. So we can consider some language along those lines if you guys have language that you want to propose to. We're happy. I think there's plenty of common ground there.
Okay, I think I understand that. Just make sure I've asked everything I want to ask.
Yeah, I see a couple of typos and things here, reference to calendar days and aware versus award to, so we'll have to clean up some of the language before we end up finalizing it, but where, like I said, I just want to be consistent, so right now, most of it is set up as working days or Monday through Friday work days. If there's references to calendar days here, my intent would be to change out the work days before we finalize it. Or if we end up settling on calendar days, change it all to calendar days. So I did see while we were talking a few of those, and Dr. Tina as well. So.
Okay, just give me a second. So there's a sentence in the third paragraph about halfway down.
Which section are we looking for?
We're still in the arbitration section of your proposal. And I've seen language like this before. It generated a little bit of conversation on our side. So I was interested in, if you don't mind, just kind of giving your theory of this for a moment. Since the sentence says where a college administrator has made a judgment involving exercise of discretion, the arbitrator shall not substitute his or her judgment for that of the college. So I guess types of situations where you feel this would be operative, is kind of the general purpose.
Yeah, I mean, my view, and the administration view here of the arbitration, agreements and arbitration is to resolve whether or not we're violating the contract. It's not, in our view, the arbitrator's province to run the college. This wouldn't run the union, and there are lots of things where there's discretion where the contract itself is not violated, but somebody's unhappy with decisions being made, and there was multiple reasonable avenues to choose from. In our view, that's not the province of the arbitrator to come in to decide. So in terms of the examples where it could come up, I mean, it means anything where if you want something definitive, then it should be in the contract in terms of you have to do this, you have to do that. And throughout the contract, whatever we end up with is going to have a lot of language that constrains our discretion, which is in part the purpose of the contract. And we don't abide by any of that ends up in here, and if we don't, you get to agree and arbitrate. What we're trying to avoid is being able to second guess just any decision where the nature of the decision is we've got discretion built in and it's not otherwise constrained by the contract. So in our view, unfortunately, a lot of arbitrators do feel like they take the approach of, well, how would I have made this decision if I had been the one making the decision? And we don't like those arbitrators. Mm-hmm. You guys might, I'm giving you my view, but the arbitrator should sit back and go, did the administration in making that decision violate the provision of the contract? If we did, rule in your favor, not what would I have done had I been president. That's the president's job. And that'll be a line of thinking you'll hear from us throughout, no doubt. And I'm sure I'll hear back from you that, well, we like Dr. Beer and we trust him and trust the administration, but who knows down the road, what someone will decide, maybe a different president 20 years from now, and that's the purpose of contract, to constrain discretion. And I agree with that. If that's the case, put it in the contract in those areas. So that's really what we're trying to get there. Again, we can probably tighten that language up some, but that's the point of it.
Okay.
And if you want an example, like discipline is the one that comes up a lot. So if you have a contract that says, well, we can discipline you for violating this rule, whatever, stealing from us. Things aren't going to happen here, right? But and we get into a situation where we find that an employee has violated that, and by contract or policy or whatever, we have the ability to suspend, demote, or discharge without any limiting language in the contract. In our view, that's a discretionary decision, and what type of discipline we would be able to implement. If you grieved it and could show that, this employee didn't commit the violation, there was no grounds for disciplinary action, then you would prevail. But we don't think, unless there's language limiting our discretion, that they should say, well, you've proven that this person violated the contracts, but we don't like. I would have only given the person an oral counseling instead of written reprimand, or suspend for 5 days to 3 days. To us, those are discretionary decisions unless we negotiate something to limit it. That's the one that comes up a lot. And I know, I can see you smiling over there. I know you're saying, well, that's what arbitrator should be able to do. We disagree with that.
Okay, I understand the position. I don't think any of that was a huge surprise to me, and I don't think you'll find anything that we would say about that a huge surprise in return. I am a little more sympathetic than maybe your average union business agent to the idea of an arbitrator who does more calling balls and strikes than judgment calls. I kind of like knowing what I get with an arbitrator, and I know if I know that this guy is going to go a certain way, then I know whether or not I want to pick him. But if it's someone who kind of just goes off the cuff and does whatever, I'm usually not comfortable with that, even if it does come in my favor sometimes, because it may go wildly not in my favor at other times when. So I get that.
Yeah, having said all that, as you know, a lot of arbitrators, we have this language in a lot of contracts, and they just ignore it anyway. So it's arbitrators have a lot of power when we go to arbitration, and that, to your point, is something I know when I'm counseling on the employer side. I always bring that up, and well, how would we prevail on this grievance or not if we go to arbitration? So, you've got great arguments. I'm sure you guys say the same thing. You got great arguments, but it really depends on the arbitrator, because it could go either way. And the best thing to do is to try and, when we're negotiating, try and negotiate the contract such that we don't end up in arbitration. I mean, that's easier said than done, right? But if we can do that and avoid it, the good news is, higher education, you generally don't have as much of those kinds of disputes as you do in some others here in Florida. So I'm optimistic, but I think we're on the same page, and it's a little difference of opinion, but in the end, hopefully it doesn't have to be exercised very often.
Yeah, it's one of my colleagues, I guess emeritus, likes to say the root word of arbitration is arbitrary. Okay, one more question. So I see here in the last paragraph about fees and expenses, it says if either party elects to have the arbitration transcribed, then the parties will split that. So I know in my practice, I usually prefer not to have a court reporter, but now it depends on the arbitrator. Some, they'll go nuts if they don't have a transcript to go off of, but others take very good notes and they really don't need one at all. So a lot of times I actually prefer not to have one just to save the costs. Now if the management advocate wants one, in my opinion, that's fine, but I'm not sure that I agree that either party should be able to compel the other to pay for that expense if they're not really interested in it.
Yeah, here's the reason it's in there. It's not that typical. Not necessarily a deal breaker from our perspective, but I agree that a lot of times you don't need it, don't want it, because it's expensive for those who don't deal in this world. It's expensive to have a transcript, court reporter transcript. So my general practice is I like to have a court reporter, but I don't always order a transcript because it's a lot cheaper. But you have the ability to order the transcript if you need it down the road and think it's worth the money. Other times we'll just tape record it, that kind of thing. Usually have a record. But to your point, some arbitrators really like it, and a lot of times we're kind of put on the spot. Arbitrator can, well, you're going to have a court reporter, you're going to get a transcript. And typically, they're looking to the employer to say, well, the arbitrators will say, well, you're going to provide me a transcript. And then we usually end up with the union negotiating, we're going to split the costs. Not usually end up both sides, because part of the arbitration game, if you will, and you should call it a game, but the dance with the arbitrators, you don't really want to upset the judge, right? So if the arbitrator says, well, you guys got to provide me a transcript, they know we don't have to, but it's hard to say no to the person who's not going to start hearing your case 5 minutes later and making the decision. And so, typically, again, this might come down to personalities. Usually, if we end up in that boat, my practice has been to get with the union, we always end up splitting the cost. So that's why I put it in there. Maybe, and again, maybe there's some language we can reach some common ground where it's the arbitrator requesting, if an arbitrator requests the transcript. That's really what my thought was. If we end up having to get it really from the impetus being from the arbitrator, let's split the cost. But the arbitrators never direct you because they really can't, but they make a little strong implication or suggestion, which usually forces us to think, well, maybe we ought to keep this guy happy. He or she is not going to like us much if we don't have good facilities, bring the donuts, and have a court reporter. So it's not a deal breaker, and it's something that can be worked on. But that was the thought. So just thinking out loud here, maybe it's something along the lines of the arbitrator desires the transcript. The parties agree to pay it. If either side wants it for their own purposes, then they pay it, unless the other side voluntarily wants to also do it.
Okay, well, I understand the concern. Yeah.
A few times, so part of what's happened, finish the thought, is a few times what's happened in my experience is arbitrator leans on the employer to order it, go to the union, and they just, not UFF, they say, no, we're not going to buy it. And put the price all on us, we pay the price, then they order a copy of it, which is a lot less for those of you involved. When you're the first person ordering it, it's a high cost. When you're providing a copy, it's a low cost. It's kind of underhanded. It's not high enough to get to ruin relationships over, but so that's sort of what the thought was. Let's both split the total cost, and it evens out.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if we're both getting the same thing out of it, I think it's fair that we both pay the same cost.
Right, it just makes sense. And hopefully we don't end up in that kind of a proceeding, but you never know, so you have to plan ahead. You want to move on to the leaves of absence?
Yeah, that was it for Article 5. That's my questions about, so proceed.
Fran, can we agree, as last time, anything that you're presenting, that we share Word versions afterwards? Appreciate it. All right, so the leave of absence article, we started with yours since it was more comprehensive in terms of the various types of leaves. And we can go, I guess, section by section. as you can see, if you thumb through the whole article, there's some that we have stricken all together, and I'll explain our thinking in that as we get to them. And others where we're tweaking the language. So just looking at section 1 here, one of the things that, in our view, we're trying to do with the contract is not create any ambiguities, not create issues where there really isn't a bona fide dispute. So one of the things I'm trying to do with that is to limit language that's really not necessary. So that's really why I struck subparagraph C of section 1, types of leave, that lists all the ones that then follow. Is it a big deal? Probably not. And that's not, in my mind, the type of thing that's a deal breaker. Once you negotiated, included the rest of them, could you have that in your mind? But it's really not necessary. So, given you have the other meat on those provisions coming thereafter. Subsection D is the kind of struck that in section 1, article 1. I'm not sure if this was your article 1. I think it renumbered it from the prior proposal because I cut it out of your main document. So the article number is going to be different. Same as on ours too. So that may get confusing down the road. Point out there the article numbers at the top of everything I've handed out have changed from last time. So we'll get hung up on that. But I think the rest of the sections are the same. So section 1D, the concern here is it's very broad and open-ended. It's the kind of thing that's right for dispute. An employee who is on approved leave shall retain all rights and privilege under this agreement. Don't disagree with that general principle, but I don't know why it wouldn't be the case otherwise. And all rights, benefits, privileges under the agreement and any applicable college policies. If it's in the agreement, they have the right, is my view. So maybe we can tighten that language up if there's something more specific, but it's too general. Somebody's going to have a perceived dispute even if there isn't one.
Well, I'll just make a comment. I think I agree that in most circumstances, yeah, they have it. It's in the agreement. They have it. They're on leave. They still have it. I think the case where there do tend to be exceptions to that is if someone takes someone goes on personal leave for a year or two without pay, they're still sort of in the system, but they're not really doing anything. I mean, should they have health insurance then? I mean, it's great if you want to give it to them, but I would understand if you felt you shouldn't be obligated to continue someone's health insurance for years if they're not an employee. So I mean, I think it was really that sort of thing, just to say, okay, here are some places where that might not happen without that being construed as affecting something else.
This language here, so that example would, to me, that confusing. So the language to me says, well, you're on leave, you get all the rights, benefits, and privileges. Someone could argue if you're on an unpaid leave where you typically don't get insurance, well, because of this, I should get insurance. And so an employee may view that differently. So in my view, the way to handle that would be when we get to anything where we're talking about unpaid leave specifically, we should put in there. You get insurance, you don't get insurance, accrue holidays, sick leave, all those kinds of things. Spell it out as opposed to having too generic language there, because I think that's just going to cause dispute. But
yeah, I mean, if we want to have a list of all the things they don't get, and it's understood that what's not listed here they do get, I mean, we're fine with that too. I think we just don't want to run it because I've had this before where someone goes on, unpaid leave for a year, and the contract says, we won't have health insurance, and then, but the contract doesn't say that, you won't lose seniority. You won't lose seniority, and then 15 years later we get a new administration who says, well, yeah, I mean, you don't have health insurance, so obviously you are losing seniority as well. So it's that sort of like we don't want people to infer.
It's a good point, because I think that the underlying point there that you're making it's hard to predict every unique circumstance. And so I get where you're going with. I think maybe we could tighten up language along those lines, or when we get to specific types of leave, if we want some sort of generic or catch-all language within, like using that example, the unpaid year leave or whatnot. A lot of times the way I've tried to approach that is to list out as best you can the things you can foresee: the health insurance, maybe seniority, accruing other leave, that kind of thing. But the things that we don't foresee, to analogize to leave. So a lot of times we end up saying something along the lines of, you're entitled to any other rights or benefits as other people on an unpaid leave status, or on a paid leave, because that's usually on leave, that's usually where it comes down to. If you're on paid leave, approved paid leave, usually you get this slate of benefits. If you're on unpaid, usually you get a different slate of benefits, and then we could alter that slate, if you will, with specific language where it's appropriate. That often is the case. So there's things like that I think maybe we can consider and kick around and caucus about. So we don't disagree with your general point, I guess is what I'm saying there. But the language, I think, is too broad for our purposes to be comfortable with it, and it wouldn't cause more issues than it fixes. The subparagraph E, that is problematic. In our mind, the college, of course, wants to accommodate all faculty members, certainly anybody experiencing medical concerns or disabled and things of that nature. If you're unable to teach, to do it remotely, though, our view is we've got, obviously, I think we all agree that what's most important is the students. And sometimes that'll work. We can accommodate, but there are plenty of times it probably won't work, or it might work on a temporary basis, not permanent. So we're uncomfortable with just that blanket allowing to teach remotely in lieu of taking leave across the board, and it could be ripe for some abuse as well. So we're uncomfortable with that general provision. And the last subsection of section 1 is similar to, I think, D is a little too broad, and certainly the regardless of type or duration. So my experience, and it's not, I only use my experience only because it's, I think, informs the debate, but certainly I'm not the decision maker on our side. But my experience is that medical issues and leaves as a result of medical need are highly fact specific. So you get everything from somebody who needs the sick day off one day to needing 5 years off, and everything in between. And of course, there are a lot of rights for people who need medical leave, both in their entitlement to some leave and also in privacy and things of that nature as to the underlying conditions, some of which the employer has a right to get, some they don't. So to me, it's a little too blanket to say, well, you get all this regardless of the type or duration, because with most cases, I think we can accommodate, we probably have to accommodate in the law, but there are some where we plenty of times, unfortunately, for example, where an employer has to separate an employee because of medical reasons, because the employee can never come back. They suffer an accident or whatever where they can never come back and do their job. Now, you typically don't do that overnight. The employee has to be given some time to try and recuperate and whatnot, but it happens. Hopefully, it doesn't happen very often, but it does. So my concern with that would be this type of language. Can't foresee the varying circumstances where this is going to come up, and again, might lead to more dispute than it fixes. I think I can guess the general purpose from the union's perspective and faculty of why you want something here. You want some protection, of course, if you go on leave, that you're not going to be tossed out quickly. Oh, yeah, we don't think you can come back after a week and get rid of somebody and use it as an excuse. And fortunately, again, I think the good news is higher ed, we don't see that too often, but we have to tighten up the language to. And the good news too, for the fact that I'm sure you probably are aware of this, but there's a lot of protection under law already for whether we have it in the contract or not, whether it's ADA, state law, and that sort of thing. So that's sort of our thought on striking those C through F of the union's initial proposal. Sick leave, section 2, unless you have questions on those, I'll just kind of keep going. You interrupt me, Graham, whenever you want.
Yeah, I think we understand the position on each of those things. I think we can come up with some counters that might be more to your liking, I think. So appreciate the perspective.
Yeah, our proposal on sick leave was, I looked at yours as, it looks like the gist of the proposal was to pattern itself after the state law and the college existing policy, which frankly is our proposal, is to mirror that at this point in time. I don't think there's a reason to change it. So the language change here was really just to bring it closer to the existing policy. Subsection C has a procedure. I think this is out of the policy too. But the last sentence may not, but I did, in our proposal on sick leave, we had a requirement that the college in its discretion can require supporting medical documentation if the employee has been absent for 3 consecutive days. And I think under the law, generally, the employer is allowed to request narrowly tailored supporting documentation on the need for medical leave, and you can't ask for everybody's personnel facts and file from their time they were toddlers. But the reason I like it in the contract is a lot of times we get pushback from employees because there's a lot of people who think, well, this is private information, you can't get this. And generally, that's true. In most scenarios, you can't require people to just hand over medical information, but this is one of the exceptions where if you want to go on paid leave status, the employer is entitled to a limited amount. They can only share it with people who need to know that kind of thing, and it's protected, it can't be disseminated. But I find that the employees have a lot of misconception. I don't know so much about the faculty here. Again, usually you're dealing with a more educated group, but so it's nice to be able to point to it and say, look, it's right even in the contract. I put it in his discretion and after 3 days, so to keep sort of as a nod to usual reaction I get from employees. Well, we don't want people just fishing around on everything every time they're absent for 1 day or every single time. So I don't think it's anybody's intent on our side to be too burdensome with that or onerous. That's sort of the idea with that one.
So what form might this supporting documentation take? What sorts of documentation? I guess I'm just wondering what some examples of what would be or what wouldn't be sufficient.
Usually, typically we're asking for something from healthcare provider that says, yes, there's a need for leave here, or this person's going to be out for X number of days or anticipated. Usually there's not a lot of certainty on these things, but I can tell you where it comes up for me a lot is when you have somebody who's out, again, more extended, 3 or more times, the typical questions that we ask the healthcare provider to answer are, is there a medical reason for the leave? Justify the leave. Typically that's yes if you're in that boat and ready. But the other things I always try and ask is what do you as a healthcare provider anticipate the duration to be? Which is something a lot of employers do not ask, and I get a lot of calls and go, well, what do we have to do? What are our rights? And that's, well, it depends. Is this person going to be out 6 months, 2 years, or 2 days? And it changes. So usually we want to know that. And then what medical restrictions? And in the teaching environment, I don't know that that's as big a deal. Usually, in a more physical job, there may be light duty and things of that nature. So I don't know that we request that a lot here, but it has to be, under the law, it has to be tailored to the job. You can't ask, can this person do X, Y, Z? It has to do your job. So I'm not going to ask the doctor to say, can they carry 200 pounds if you don't have to carry 200 pounds? But those kinds of things. So usually when we get leave, we also get accommodation kind of requests. We want, whether it's teaching remotely, things of that nature. So it's information from healthcare provider to support that. What can the employee do? What can't they do? And I always circle back to, this is something you really should want. Because the alternative, I can tell you what I tell my clients not to do, is the employer, they act as doctor or healthcare provider, and they'll assume lots of things. And the law really is such that you're not supposed to do that if you're an employer. You want to defer to the experts. And I guess you get some experts that might be doctors or healthcare providers on the faculty, of course, but generally we want to defer not only to experts being healthcare providers, but the employees, healthcare provider, and not second guess judgments. So whenever I'm in a situation where I'm advising a client about accommodations, leave, and things of that nature, the starting point is always, well, what does their healthcare provider suggest? In order to do that, we have to have the information, because the other side of that coin is we, as the employer, don't have to take the employee's word for it. We can get it from the healthcare provider. So sometimes the employee and the healthcare provider disagree. And I can tell you, when I get that scenario, I always tell the employer, you can rely on the healthcare provider. It doesn't really matter what the employee thinks. So the employee says, well, I think I can come back to work tomorrow. I want to work. And the healthcare provider says, no, they can't. I'm not releasing work. And I go with the healthcare provider. And I tell the employee, if you disagree with your doctor, healthcare provider, go get another one, or you invite it out and tell us and have them send it in. Because by law, we're not allowed to allow you to exceed your medical restrictions either. So that's the kind of material that we'd be looking for. Again, it doesn't come very often, but when it does come up, it's helpful. And I think most employees, frankly, should want us to rely on the healthcare provider as opposed to forming our own potentially erroneous assumptions about their medical conditions. The good news is the information obtained, if it's obtained, is all protected. It has to be kept separate from personnel file, for example. It can't be disseminated, can't be released to the public, and can only be disseminated internally with those who need to know. So there is still privacy and whatnot.
Okay, I understand.
Personal leave, I think you guys were just kind of tracking current practice and policy. If you get currently 4 days personal leave, we're certainly not suggesting any change to that. There's some thought whether it was 4 or 3, but whatever the existing.
It's 4.
From the sick, yeah, it comes from the sick pool. Which is what I understand your proposal to be. The only difference is we want to ensure that personal leaves of absence are requested and approved in advance if it's a personal day. So I'm not sure if you want to, the way I read yours, here is that the employee submits it in advance, but not necessarily approved. If it's a personal leave, unlike a sick, our view is it should be approved, just so there's no dispute of that. But I don't know if that was your intent or if the intent was just.
Well, I guess I think the idea was maybe looking at our struck language here, maybe shall be approved when an employee submits it in advance. I don't know that it's that big a difference, but I think it was just like, basically you're not going to have an administrator say, no, I don't think you need to take a personal day. The idea is that if they want to take a personal day, they just take it.
Yeah, our idea would be it'd be approved, subject to approval, because we don't want anybody just sort of last second or taking a personal day on a day where they're truly needed to be there for something. If you're there, you can't be there because of illness, sickness, whatever, it's one thing, but it's just a personal day you want to take, then we have to work together. So there may be some compromise language. I know I've suggested in the past on the approval language, such as we request in advance approval and where approval won't be unreasonably withheld or whatnot. Something along those lines is perhaps some common ground. But,
yeah, I don't think we're trying to upend practice at all. We haven't been receiving, dozens of complaints about the personal leave procedure or anything. We're just trying to. No, I was just saying, I don't think we're trying to upend what is currently done on that. We haven't been people haven't been lodging tons of complaints about personal leave process with us or anything like that. We're just trying to get it codified, so I don't think this is gonna be a showstopper.
Yeah, that is, the approval language that was pulled up is in current practice or policy, so, yeah, I think we're on the same page, we're just trying to codify what your existing practice is right now. Parental leave, section 4. Forget where you guys are coming with that. I'm not prepared, certainly at this stage, to agree to that. Some of those, and with some of these, you'll see here on that, along those lines, where it's an added benefit over and above what you currently have, particularly something that costs money, resources. I know everybody always hates hearing about that from our side. We're always harping on the cost side, and it might be better down the road to discuss as part of packages with other compensation benefits where there may be some trade-offs and things of that nature. Agreeing to it out of the box without that process, though, is not something we're prepared to do today. Yeah.
On B, it says personal leave of absence with pay must be approved by the president. It's actually approved by the supervisor.
Right.
Only the without pay would be the president, correct?
Correct.
And so we may need to modify our language there. The intent is to have it track our current policy, so. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We may not want the president to have to get involved with approving the day off when you just go to your meeting supervisor. I don't think he would be caught that problem. Yeah, that's my mistake there. FMLA, if we want to move to section 5, from a labor practitioner's perspective, I can say FMLA is a major pain all the time. Not so much that I disagree with the law itself, I don't, but in administering it seems like such an easy statute. You get 12 weeks off for a variety of reasons listed in the statute, and it's never easy in practice is the problem. We have suggested striking it, not because you're not covered, you are covered, and you get this benefit either, but the short of it is you already have this by statute. And sort of with the recognition clause, we don't want to convert every difference of opinion on the FMLA into a contract grievance dispute. When you have a remedy, if there's a violation of the FMLA already, 2 remedies. You can either go to court, if you'd rather avoid, but you can also go to the Department of Labor, and we'll do an investigation. So it's more philosophical. If you have the by statute, it's not necessary to be in there. And some of that, we don't really care if you have statutory rights, if it's in the contract anyway. But with FMLA, the issue is there are so many different scenarios where it comes up, and it gets amended all the time to where you can update your contract and you can negotiate during the life of the contract to change things when the laws change, but a lot of people don't do that. It just boils down into grievances that don't need to be grievances. So for that reason, we suggest striking it, not because you've not taken that benefit away, you still have it. Don't think it should be in the contract. No comments on that.
Understand.
You understand where we're coming from. Extended medical leave was your section 6. In here, I think the intent, it looked like from your proposal, was really to codify again what you already have. Looking at the policy and practice, and we're on board with that principle. The suggestions, I think, are to add the approval again. I think that's in your current practice. I think that subsection F is as well. I think that's where that came from. I might have added the non-FMLA because with FMLA leave, you're entitled to return to your position at the end of your FMLA by statute or an equivalent position beyond FMLA. So if you extend beyond that, then we have a little more flexibility is what the policy is to put you in your position or a comparable position. But I think, again, our suggestions are just to codify existing policy and practice.
Is the existing policy, I just honestly don't remember, does the existing policy entail the possibility of moving to a different location?
I think it does for extended medical leave policy.
Is that, this isn't something that happens often either way.
Yeah, the existing policy does have that in there. Comparable position related to a different location upon return to work. So that sentence, that subsection F, is with the exception of the first clause, college reserves right from there on is just lifted straight from policy. The first clause I added the non-FMLA thing just so supervisors on our site don't think they can necessarily do that if somebody's on FMLA leave. You might not be able to assign someone to a different location. It may not be an equivalent position. So I wanted to make sure we didn't have a supervisor doing something contrary to FMLA. Yeah, I think as Dr. Jeanette points out, I think this is probably the origin of the policy. Again, this is hard to predict. If you're on an extended medical leave, it might be different for someone that needs 12 weeks versus 15 weeks versus 2 years. If it's not too long, odds are it'll be easy to put you right back where you were. If it's too long, other things have had to happen in the meantime, and maybe things have changed. So the general theory we're on board with, you're going to be brought back, you're going to get something comparable, so we're not going to take you in your specialty or whatever, put you in something else completely, that kind of thing. I don't think anybody's going to suggest that, but there has to be a little more flexibility, just really depending on the circumstances.
Okay, I mean, I think it's rare, but as spread out as these campuses are, even the theoretical possibility causes a little bit of angst. So we'll have a conversation about that. I also received a notice that there's a question about your addition in paragraph D there. Eric, do you want to just answer your question?
Well, I want to know if it says that it's extended medical leave is subject to prior approval by the college president. Is it your intention to extend this to the president this time, or is this should be immediate supervisor like it was last time?
By last time you're referring to the sick leave.
Yeah, it's designee, college president or designee. We don't have a problem adding that language. I think the concern there is that when you're talking about extended leaves, that it generally goes up the chain. Immediate supervisor.
That's probably you're making a distinction there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think on that one, we would say we want to leave it, or maybe we add designee in case he doesn't necessarily need to get involved. We can appoint someone else at a lower level to do it, but it's definitely different from the personal day off. That's a good point.
Okay, I think that's it on this section.
Temporary duty. The only thing different there was we changed, you had, of course, the reimbursement of expenses for somebody on temporary duty per your article on that. And we have it reverted back to the current board rule. I know if your offhand, if your proposal was the board rule, I thought it was a little broader. Let me see. under section 11A of Article 9 was a little more broad, just saying we would read faculty on this type of temporary duty will be reimbursed to the full extent allowed by the laws of the state of Florida for the expenses incurred. Again, I don't know that there's much of a difference in opinion there, but I think the language is a little broad for our liking. And there are, given we're in the public sector and there's a fairly heavily regulated industry, there are statutory limits on that kind of reimbursement. But I don't know, are you guys, travel expenses? One of the things that I think maybe we need to hash out is whether if it's travel expenses and whatnot, that's pretty heavily regulated in what we can do and what we can't do. When you say all expenses incurred, that always gives me a little bit of pause because maybe it's the lawyer in me, but I immediately think worst case scenario, 3 years from now, somebody coming back with their Dunkin' Donuts receipt saying I needed that dozen Dunkin' Donuts as part of this, or whatever, expenses incurred. To me, we need a little bit more definition as to what those
Yeah,
are.
it refers back, technically it refers back to an internal IMM, which outlines all the procedures of what's reimbursable. And basically, generally, if you're assigned somewhere else within a day, you get the difference of your commute miles beyond what you were commuting to your regular campus by federal law. That's considered your regular travel to get to work, so you get paid for the differential. If you go outside the district, then there's additional rules of how you, take the most economical way to get there, what's the airfare, car, whatever, how you're reimbursed for that.
Get the 5-star hotel and all that.
Yeah, and, hotels and the rental car companies we use and so forth. So it's detailed out in an actual IMM or what the procedure. And again, tying into the state guidelines related to travel.
Yeah, let me ask you guys this, if you're in position to answer it now or whether you need caucus. Your reference to all expenses incurred reimbursement in the Article 9, Section 11A, is the intent from the union to essentially keep what we have here in terms of limited to the travel, lodging, meals, those sort of things, or is it more broad? Because if it's really the intent is to keep what we have here and we just want to flesh that out, then I think that's what we need to do is to maybe, I just refer to the board rule rather than flesh it out. If we don't like that, the alternative is to just flesh it out in the contract. If it's more of we think it should be other expenses as well, then that's a different debate on our side, whether we can do that or would do that. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, so as far as whether our proposal is broader than the existing rules or IMMs, I don't remember them well enough to comment to that specifically. But the purpose in Article 9, Section 11A is just really, if you approve someone to go to a conference and they submit expenses that it's legal to reimburse them, then just reimburse them, right? So again, this guessing game about, you should do this.
Like meals, I think we probably have limits around per diem or whatnot, so you can't go to Burns.
Right. You can go
Or you
anywhere.
can, we're just gonna pay for it.
Right. You can go anywhere you want, you shouldn't make alcohol, if you do, college and reimbursement,
Right.
reimbursement for diem amount. So it's all defined, and again, when the person completes a request for travel and it's approved, it explains out the estimates of what everything will be. And then when the item's submitted, then it follows the internal management memorandum that says, reimbursement for meals, per diem and so forth, and then reimbursement for direct costs and registration and so forth, so.
What I would suggest is when you guys talk further, take a look at those procedures and policies, and if there's something you want over and above that, then point that out to us and we can work on language if we're willing to agree. If not, then let's try and figure out whether we spell it out in the contract or reference the rule, or I think the way you guys have it currently is a little too open-ended for our liking. But if it's just an attempt to codify what we already have, then we're on the same page. We just need to spell it out.
Yeah, that would
Yeah,
be,
we can talk about that.
that would be item 512, that was the actual procedure.
And that governs all employees, administration, staff, et cetera. It's not exclusive to faculty.
And again, we also use that as a reference when we're hiring contractors to do work. If it's built in their contract for travel reimbursement, then they have to follow the policy the same way the employee would follow the document and, keep the cost under those standards.
Okay, yeah, we can have a conversation about that. I did have one question, this is as good a time as any to ask, because this kind of comes up here and there in your proposals. There are occasional references to board rules, IMM, things like that. And I've heard different philosophies about what it means to refer to a policy like that in a contract. So is your intent in doing that kind of thing, maybe it's not the same answer for every case, but is the intent to incorporate the text of that as it currently is into the contract by reference, or to, if the rule or the policy changes, then it also changes for the contract?
The preference is the latter, so that if it's incorporated, it doesn't codify the language as it exists today. However, that's always, in my experience, always a topic for negotiation itself. So I think in our initial proposal, I think I put in a section on rules or whatnot that would give us the ability to do that. Now, if it's codified in the contract, usually that means what we end up agreeing to is if we're going to make that change, we can't do it without negotiating the change. I have had and have seen in other contracts where we codify the language as it exists the day you ratify the contract, and then if we change it, not effective for the bargaining unit, but effective only for everybody else, meaning you're stuck with that version. I don't particularly like that because it results in both rules where part of the employees are living under one set and the other. It also reduces some flexibility. So to me, I usually only incorporate it by reference on the kinds of rules that are either not going to change very much or are going to be the kind of things where we can sit down and agree on it pretty quickly, or it's driven by state law requirements like the reimbursement expenses and things of that nature. Generally, we're following the guidelines of the state and statutes of what we're allowed to reimburse, mileage and things of that nature. So if it's something that's a big ticket item that my approach anyway is not to put in a reference to the rule and then revise the rule whenever we want, cut out the bargaining unit and the union. And I've seen those kinds of practices before, but I would say for us, our purposes, we would want to spell that out in the contract, how we intend to do that. So I would recommend we have a section, an article on policies and rules, what we can and can't do, what we can do without negotiation, what we can do only with negotiation, what we can't do, period, until the contract expires, and those kinds of things. I think trying to do that now is going to be difficult, however. But if, for purposes of our current negotiation, if you see a reference to rule in one of our proposals, I would interpret that as the existing rule, but as amended, it's amended during the life. It applies to bargaining just as it would everybody else.
Okay.
So I'm trying not to avoid that. I'm trying not to put reference in rules where I think it's going to be a problematic, or in the end, we're going to ask you to say, well, agree that we can do that. And we'll only do it on certain things if we negotiate it. I know it's a big ticket item, but I think that's a good question to ask because there's often dispute over that. That's what I'm saying. If you don't like the reference in rule, we can spell those things out in the contract if that's the concern.
Yeah, well, I think for some things, it's not going to be an issue to simply refer to the rule. For some things, we probably are going to want things spelled out. There may be some things that are big and complicated enough that it's not worth the paper to spell it out, and we may want to incorporate that by reference. I think it'll probably just be a case-by-case thing, but I just wanted to make sure.
I agree, and that's where I can tell you that's when I'm putting together. I'm thinking the same thing. I'm trying not to do it on things where I know you would object to that. I know if we put something in reference to a rule that's a mandatory subject to bargaining, and then we want to have the ability to revise the rule without negotiation, that would be a waiver of the union's rights. So I'm not going to do that underhanded. It would be presented to you and you would either agree or not. But expense reimbursement, I figured was pretty straightforward. So that's why it's referenced there now. Okay. On the next section, illness, injury, in the line of duty, leave for that. Again, it's looked like we're just sort of codifying existing practice because of the nature of, talking about workers' comp primarily here, because of the nature of the union contract and the grievance procedure added the last sentence that, and I assume you guys would be on board with this, but tell us if you're not. The administration of workers' comp benefits, fortunately in higher ed, you don't have this too often. Obviously, there's a whole administrative procedure how you claim benefits and what you do if there's a dispute. It doesn't necessarily go to courts, goes to administrative agencies. And our view is, I'm hoping you're not suggesting we supplant that procedure and use instead the grievance arbitration procedure. But I would like to make that clear that anybody has a workers' comp claim, and if there's a dispute, it goes under the workers' comp law. The administrative law judge and all that have the expertise. I've yet to have anybody try and take the workers' comp benefit claim to arbitration, but I'd be a lot more comfortable if we're all on the same page. That was not the intent of this article.
Yeah, that didn't, I don't think that really crossed anyone's mind in the drafting here. I've been through workers' comp as the injured employee. It's not a very fun process. I don't think that we're trying to shoot, I don't think we're anticipating trying to, try workers' comp claims in the arbitral forum. We'll talk about it, but yeah, we weren't trying to do that.
Okay, I didn't think so on that, and I put in there just to highlight the language that we're agreeing that any claim for benefits under the chapter 440, which is the workers' comp law, is not subject to grievance and arbitration. So we're not saying you couldn't grieve if we don't give you the 12 days. And, the substance of this article is more the benefit, the workers' comp benefit. And I do a lot of employment stuff, but I don't do any workers' comp benefit claims. It's just a whole different procedure, and workers' comp judges have special expertise there that arbitrators wouldn't have. Military leave, I think you guys just tracked our current practice, which I think is outdated. The statute was changed a few years back, so we can verify this if necessary, but we need to update our practice, I think. The law used to say when you needed military training, you get 17 days of paid leave to do your training. There were some disputes years ago about what 17 days mean, because some people are employed on 24-hour shifts. If you're a firefighter, some are 8 hours, some are 10, 12. So they changed that law, legislature, and one of the times I think they did a good job. They changed it to just be 240 hours of paid training in a 12-month period. So all I did was track that, and Graham, if you want me to send you cites to the statute, we can do that. And also, I fleshed out, in addition to that training leave where the law provides for public employees, you get 240 hours of paid military leave, that if you're called to active military service, then you get 30 days paid, full pay. So our policies still, in my mind, reflected the old statute before it was amended. And we're going to have to update that, but we want the contract to be compliant with current state law.
Do you have the statute reference at your fingertips, or?
Yeah, it's Florida statute 115.07 is the 240 hours for training, and 115.09 and 115.14 is the active military service. There is another statute, which I don't think we cover, but you get it, and I'm not necessarily opposed if we want to put it in. It doesn't come very often, but if you're a reservist and you get called for call out for emergency declared by the governor, I don't know that one off the top of my head, it's in chapter 240, I think, but you get 30 days, I think. I'd have to double check that, but I think you get 30 days. if you know, hurricane, you get called out sometimes, reservists, something like that. You get that by statute anyway, whether it's in here or not. I very, very rarely ever have disputes over military leave, but I guess it could come up. So from our perspective, the changes here really just to try and track current law, but take a look at that. And if you disagree with it, the law, I can tell you, is if you haven't dealt with military leave for the longest time, you didn't have to, unfortunately now it comes up more often. It's not a lot of model clarity. That first section deals with training. The second one deals with active military services, but they look like they deal with the same thing. In reality, you're actually entitled to both. You can be called out for military service and for training during the same year and get both. Some employers get that confused, which is why I broke it up into two separate, to make it clear for us and you guys. Court-related leave. Unless you have questions on the military leave.
No, we'll just check the statutes and make sure we agree. I don't think this is a controversial piece for us.
Court-related leave. From our perspective, the language is too broad. I think we do have a policy on this, but this is one of the policies that may need to be tightened up as well. I don't know that we're proposing any real change, but we want to make it clear. We've had some disputes in other scenarios where folks want to get paid for things that arise that really aren't part of the job. You know, the basic idea is to pay if you get called for jury duty or you get called as a witness or, God forbid, a defendant for something you're doing in your role as a faculty member. College should pay for it, right? I did have one where somebody sued, the employer didn't want to be paid for having to go through depositions or anything. They were, you guys haven't proposed that here, but there are things that come up that we've had other disputes where someone wants to be paid for being a witness or somehow involved tangentially with something that might relate in a tangential sense to the college employment. So the concern would be to just tighten up the language so that everybody's clear what you get paid for, what you don't. I think we can do that. I haven't proposed alternative language as of yet, but if we want this in the contract, it's something we could do so. But to me, it's still a little too broad. And you're looking at worst case scenario, years down the road, somebody's going to have a dispute, and it should be avoidable. The other thing on jury duty, I'd say, and we probably is a discussion that we have to have more on our side first, is if we're going to pay for jury duty, concern there's in recent years, probably unlike what we saw before, sometimes jury duty takes a lot longer than anticipated. So the typical trial might run a week and no one has a problem paying for that, but I've seen them run months and months, and they have run in excess of a year, so we might suggest a cap on that. Having the cap might enable you to also get off of jury if you get in that situation with a trial that might take a long time. Fortunately, that's still not the rule. The long, most trials are a week or less, but some of them are. So that's the reason we struck that, is we're not yet comfortable with the language. And lastly, sabbatical and professional. The language that we incorporated here is really to track our existing policy and practice more. I think we viewed the union's proposal as a little different or broader than that. I'm not sure. Maybe you can speak to whether that was the intent. And I think some of the requirements, for example, how long you have to have years of service to apply for sabbatical, I think was different. So I'm assuming that was intended.
We both had 3 years for that.
I think it might have been different with regard to professional versus sabbatical. You can make a distinction between those. So I think the sabbatical rule is 5 years, right?
Well, we talked about a lot of things. I don't, maybe someone on my team does, but I don't remember off the top of my head discussion intending to change sabbatical professional stuff. I might be mistaken. Does anyone remember us talking about wanting to change that? Yeah, my team's telling me we're just trying to codify this rather than change it, so.
Okay.
If that's your intent as well, I think.
Yeah, and we'll go back and look at it too, because I think that was our intent. So if we're on the same page there. It's just a matter of trying to get the language right. I mean, you know, I could have made a mistake too if it was 3 years instead of 5. But we'll look at that maybe I don't know, maybe now's a good time to take a quick caucus and confer on some of these points we've been discussing and decide and look at a few of those things and see if there's some common ground on some of these things. Yeah, the other point maybe to discuss amongst your team is looking forward to the next session, what might be some other topics to throw on the table and start talking about. We have to talk about that on our side, so if you have suggestions, we can do it now. On the 11th. How much time do you want? 15 minutes, is that good, or is that too optimistic? What do you want to do? Do you want to break longer and come back?
Give me a second. Do you want to have a discussion with a group or discussion with a conference? Might be 30.
Yeah, 30 is good.
Okay.
So let's try and get back, let's just say noon. 35.
You said it was J 120 was?
140. 140 for you, 120 for us.
Okay. All right, we'll hang out here for a minute and then. All right.
Yeah, we can talk to everyone.
Yeah.